Either you serve my husband that beer, or you pack your bags and get out of our house." My daughter's ultimatum rang through the living room like a gunshot on a quiet street. And for the first time in decades, I felt no anger, only a cold, steady resolve. I smiled, bent to retrieve the old leather suitcase from our closet shelf, and walked out the door I'd once believed would never close on me. I still remember the weight of those words as though they'd been carved into my heart. My name is Robert Bob Carlson, and this was the home I'd shared with my late wife Linda for over 40 years. On that spring afternoon, I just returned from the grocery store. The paper bags bit into my wrists, heavy with milk bread and her favorite cherry pie. The house smelled of dawn lilies and fresh-cut grass scents Linda had loved. But today, the sweetness felt like a lie. I set the bags on the marble countertop and stepped into our living room where my son-in-law, Nathan Pierce, lounged in my leather recliner. His stocking feet were bare and a half-empty beer bottle dangled from his fingers. On the TV, the Lakers were on the verge of a comeback. I cleared my throat. "Nathan, could you help me with these groceries?" He didn't look away from the screen. "Grab yourself another beer from the fridge while you're up, old man." I blinked, surprised. The fridge opened with a soft hiss, and he tossed me a domestic lager. I caught it reflexively, noting the cold sweat on the bottle. "Thanks," I said, setting the bags down again. He snorted. "Don't thank me. Just do as you're told." A chill settled in my chest. I remembered the nights Linda and I had sat in this very recliner, her knitting in hand, our feet propped up dreamily planning vacations and the grandchildren's graduations. Nathan had married our only daughter Emily 3 years ago, yet he treated my house as though he owned it, as though my welcome were conditional. Before I could respond, Emily appeared in the doorway, her blonde ponytail swinging. She'd always been my fearless girl, raincoat sneakers, and scraped knees by age 7. Today, she wore a pencil skirt and the same cold, authoritarian glare as her husband. "What's going on?" she asked. Voice clipped. I met her eyes searching for the little girl who used to climb onto my lap during thunderstorms. Instead, I saw the entitled woman Nathan had sculpted her into. "Nathan asked me to put away some groceries," I said evenly. I asked for help. Nathan rose from the recliner, beer in hand like a colossus. "It's simple. This is our house. When I ask you to do something, you do it, no questions, no attitude." Emily stepped beside him. "Dad." "He's right. We pay the bills here now. You either help when he asks, or you can go. Your call." Silence thickened the room. I looked at Emily, my daughter, torn between two worlds. The puzzle pieces clicked their $80,000 down payment on the house from my retirement savings, the monthly checks I'd written to cover utilities, groceries, and even Nathan's surprise car repairs. And now, when I'd done nothing more than ask for a little help unloading the groceries, they issued me an ultimatum. I felt something inside me quiet and harden. I lowered my voice. "All right." Nathan's smirk widened. "Good. Now about that beer." I flashed him a calm smile. "No, thank you. I'll pack." Nathan's jaw dropped. Emily blinked. They both expected tears my collapse a vow to be reasonable. But today I was done being reasonable. I turned and walked away, leaving the grocery bags on the floor where they fell. My footsteps echoed down the hall. Their voices rose in panic behind me. "Dad, wait!" Emily called. Nathan's voice followed, more desperate, "Clark." But I was already in my bedroom unlatching the suitcase I'd bought for our honeymoon to Yellowstone all those years ago. On the bed lay the remains of my life, neatly folded shirts, my journals, a photo of Linda wrapped carefully in tissue, resting in the side pocket. I packed methodically, 3 changes of clothes, socks, my reading glasses, and the small bottle of prescription pills she'd urged me to keep close after her passing. My hands moved without faltering. This was a task I'd rehearsed in my mind for years, though never believed I'd perform. From the living room came the muffled thrum of arguments. I treated their recriminations like white noise, focusing instead on the rhythmic click of the suitcase wheels across the hardwood. Once zipped, I closed the suitcase, gently smoothing the top, as though I were tucking in the memory of my home. At the front door, I paused, hand on the brass knob. I glanced back at the familiar foyer. The antique rug Linda chose the family portrait above the mantel. My Buick Roadmaster sat in the driveway, maintenance-free for years. I slid behind the wheel, inhaled the leather smoke scent in the cabin, and backed down the driveway without a backward glance. Emily's calls went unanswered as I merged onto Elm Street, her frantic voice disappearing in my rearview mirror. The 30-minute drive to Pine Lodge ran through downtown Kalispell, the florist where Linda and I bought our wedding bouquet, the bakery where she taught Emily to pick out the biggest cinnamon roll, the bank where I'd worked overtime to save enough for this very house. My hands gripped the steering wheel. Memories flickered like movie reels. But the guilt that once kept me chained loosened its grip. This was my refusal to be a servant in a home I paid for with Social Security checks and night shift overtime. Pine Lodge Motel rose up at the edge of town, its neon vacancy sign glowing intermittently, the pastel paint faded by years of mountain sun. I pulled into a spot under a flickering lamp and climbed out, suitcase in hand. The lobby smelled of stale coffee and dust, but it felt like freedom. Inside, I paid the clerk and took the room key, number 17. The hallway carpet felt welcoming somehow. I unlocked the door to a room with a twin bed, a small desk, and a window overlooking the parking lot. I set the suitcase on the luggage rack and sat on the bed's edge, listening to the hum of the neon sign outside. This hollow space was my refuge. Here I could reclaim myself. I pulled open my laptop and logged into the bank's website. Tomorrow, I'd cancel the automatic mortgage payment on our house, remove Nathan and Emily from my insurance policy, revoke her credit card privileges, and reclaim the life I'd given away. For now, I closed the laptop, lay back on the bed, and let the cool dawn air drift through the open window. The silence was not emptiness, but possibility, a promise that dignity once gone could be seized again. And as I drifted toward sleep, I understood that walking away wasn't the end of my story, but the crucial first step toward a powerful, unanticipated twist. I was no longer their safety net. I was free. The next morning, dawn's pale light filtered around the edges of the motel's threadbare curtains. I sat at the tiny desk, its faux wood surface littered with last night's paperwork, bank statements, insurance renewals, credit card offers. My coffee, black no sugar, steamed between my hands, an anchor while I summoned the courage to sever the final ties to a home that had become a battlefield. My phone buzzed, an automated reminder of the mortgage draft scheduled for today. I tapped the bank's app with trembling fingers. "Good morning, Mr. Carlson," a recorded voice insisted when I called the customer service line. I braced myself. "I'd like to cancel the automatic payment for 472 Elm Street," I said, forcing my voice steady. Silence, then the familiar click of a keyboard. "I show that's been active for 8 years. Are you sure you want to discontinue?" "Completely," I answered. "Effective immediately." Very well. You'll receive written confirmation within 3 business days. My chest loosened, one more strand of my life untangled. I thanked the agent and hung up, then refocused on my concrete plan. Next, the auto insurance. Nathan's name still sat on my policy, an umbrella shielding a reckless spender. The call to Geico was quicker, a polite click, a few confirmations, and then his Silverado and Emily's Honda were gone from my account. I leaned back, exhaling hard. It felt good righteous, even to take back what was mine. The only thing left was credit. My eyes flicked to the journal on the bed where I'd tracked every charge card payment I'd ever made for Emily. Her college textbooks, emergency dental work, that surprise last-minute flight when Nathan got laid off. Between her Visa MasterCard and a department store card, I'd been footing nearly $500 a month. I closed my eyes, remembering the nights at my old desk poring over the monthly statements by lamplight. Now I dialed the first issuer. A polite rep confirmed Emily's removal as an authorized user. "Any outstanding balances?" she asked gently. "Yes," I admitted. "But I'm not adding new charges." "Understood. We'll send her paperwork to apply for her own account. 1 down, 2 to go." By mid-morning, I'd undone 15 years of enabling and 3 brisk phone calls. My phone went quiet. For the first time in decades, the steady hum of my own life replaced the constant ping of notifications demanding more money. I closed the laptop, rubbing my temple. The emptiness of that motel room felt oddly comforting. I'd traded chaos for quiet. But reality gnawed. What would I do next? I'd never planned to be a drifter. This was exile, not liberation yet. I folded my papers, stuffed them into the side pocket of my suitcase, and headed out. The cool mountain air cleared my mind. I drove 3 blocks to Annie's Diner, the one Linda and I used to frequent on weekend road trips. The bell above the door jingled a welcome as I stepped inside, the smell of bacon and coffee hitting me with a wave of nostalgia. Bob Harrison sat in our old booth newspaper folded before him. He looked up and smiled a real brotherly grin. "Bob," I said, sliding in opposite him. He'd been a banker long before I'd retired, the one person I could trust to understand numbers and compassion in equal measure. "How are you holding up?" he asked, concern creasing his brow. I took a sip of coffee. "Better than I thought I could." "But confusing. I just cut all ties, mortgage, insurance, credit. It's like shedding my own skin." Bob nodded slowly. "Sometimes the only way to heal is to stop the bleeding." He leaned forward. "I heard about the ultimatum. That had to hurt." My throat tightened. It did. But walking away felt right. He tapped his fingers against the table. "Listen, there's something else you should know. Nathan tried to secure a home equity loan on your house last winter, $50,000. Provided paperwork that looked legit." My coffee froze halfway to my lips. What Bob passed me a folded newspaper clipping. Title search came back clean. No co-signers, no lien. Our bank flagged it as probable fraud. I stared at the line where Nathan's name had been scrawled as co-owner. Betrayal burned inside me. I'd sympathized when Nathan complained about debts. I'd covered his losses. Now I realized he'd been planning to steal the house all along. "I'm so sorry," Bob said quietly. "I should have told you sooner." "You did well to protect the bank," I said stiffly. "No complaints." I folded the clipping and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Every betrayal now fit a pattern, my goodwill papering over a ruthless opportunist. Bob pursed his lips. "If you decide to press charges..." I shook my head. "Not yet. First I need a plan. But thank you." He stood, patted my shoulder. "Any time, Bob." I wandered back to the motel, mind racing. The motel room felt small now, but I found my laptop and began drafting documents. An eviction notice drafted saved. A restraining order application under preparation. My years in finance gave me confidence in paperwork. Now legal forms carried a new thrill. The next afternoon, Detective Jim Morrison called. "Bob filled me in," he said. "I've got Ramsey from Animal Control and a deputy who'd seen Nathan lurking by your old place." "Morrison," I said, relief and tension mingling in my voice, "I'd like to file for a restraining order and report potential fraud. Also, I have evidence Nathan tried to mortgage my house with forged documents. Bring it tomorrow," he said. "We'll take it from there." I closed my laptop, exhaustion hitting, but exhaustion laced with purpose. For the first time since Emily's ultimatum, I felt in command of my destiny. I didn't know where this road would lead, courtrooms, police stations, maybe even prison cells for a son-in-law gone rogue, but walking away had shown me that dignity mattered more than comfort. And dignity, I decided, was worth fighting for. The next morning, the knot in my stomach loosened slightly as I stepped out of my motel room in search of answers rather than groceries. The lobby was empty at sunrise, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. I passed a bulletin board cluttered with ski rental ads and stale flyers for karaoke night, small-town life going on without me. I nodded politely to the night manager behind the desk as I retrieved my laptop bag and headed to the police station. Detective Morrison's office smelled of stale coffee and worn leather. He rose to greet me, hand warm and firm. "Bob," he said, "I'm glad you brought this." He held out a manila folder containing the bank's title search report and the forged loan application. I watched relief flicker across his face. "This clearly shows attempted fraud. We'll open an investigation today." I exhaled. "Thank you. I never imagined my own son-in-law would go to this length." Morrison pursed his lips. "People do desperate things when money is involved." He flipped through the folder. "We'll need your statement, and then I'll draft the restraining order petition. After that, we can arrange service hopefully today if they're still in town." My heart pounded at the thought of official paperwork barring Nathan and Emily from my life. "Let's move quickly," I said. "I'd appreciate that." He nodded. "Give me a few hours to prepare. Come back around 2. I left the station with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The sun was higher, painting the world in possibilities rather than threats. As I walked to Annie's diner for lunch, I called my attorney, Margaret Summers. She picked up on the second ring. "Bob," I heard, "I'll review your documents as soon as you send them. And I can file the eviction notice today, too. If we serve it alongside the restraining order, they'll know we mean business." "Please do," I said, relaxing for the first time. "Thank you, Margaret." I found my usual booth at Annie's and ordered a BLT and coffee. The waitress smiled knowingly, having watched me tear through pages of statements here before. I unfolded the eviction paperwork and read it again. 30-day notice for breach of the verbal agreement, failure to contribute harassment, and now fraud. The words seemed both harsh and necessary. By 2 p.m. I was back at the station with Morrison. He handed me the affidavits, one for the restraining order, one for the fraud complaint. "Sign here," he said, pointing. My signature felt like a statement of newfound strength. He tapped his pen. "I'll have the county marshal serve these this afternoon. In the meantime, I'll assign an investigator to look into the loan fraud." "You did the right thing, Bob." His confidence bolstered me. "Thank you, Detective." Outside, the sky turned a deeper blue. I drove back to Pine Lodge, retracing the route I'd taken the day I fled, and thought about the life I'd left behind. It was both comforting and alien now, but I had a new mission to reclaim my dignity and protect myself. Late afternoon, I sat in the diner again, laptop open, planning phone calls to creditors who'd been hounding me on Nathan's false address. I started with Metro Credit Recovery. A polite rep listened as I explained Nathan no longer resided at my property and that any debts in his name were not my responsibility. He confirmed they would update their records. Call after call, I cleared my name and undercut Nathan's attempts to confuse them. The diner's bell jingled behind me. I glanced up to see Pastor Williams entering. He spotted me and slid into the booth across. "Bob," he said, "people are talking. I just wanted to check on you." I smiled gratefully. "I'm holding up better than I expected. We filed the papers today." His eyebrows rose. "A restraining order and eviction notice?" "Yes." I laid the folder out. "They tried to mortgage my house with forged documents. This is beyond disrespect, it's criminal." He flipped through the pages, his face growing solemn. "I'm sorry you had to face this alone. I didn't—" "Not really. The community's been supportive once they learned the truth." He nodded. "Let me know if you need anything at church. We'll keep you in prayer, and our doors are open if you need to speak." I clasped his hand. "Thank you, Pastor. I appreciate that." As he left, I felt the weight of my isolation lift. I was building a network of allies, law enforcement friends, faith leaders. The road ahead still held courtroom hearings and legal battles, but I no longer feared being alone. That evening, light rain pattered on the motel window. I gathered my papers to review one last time when my phone buzzed a text from Emily's number. "Why are you doing this to us?" it read. My chest tightened, but anger didn't surface. I typed back, "I did this because I won't be treated like a servant, and I won't have my home stolen." No reply. I closed my eyes against the sting. Tomorrow the sheriff would serve. Tonight I would rest knowing I had stood up for myself. When the knock came late and unexpected, I was ready. I opened the door to 2 county marshals holding sealed envelopes. One was the restraining order, the other the eviction notice. As they handed them over, I saw Nathan's car idling across the parking lot, headlights dim in the rainy dusk. My fingers shook as I signed the acceptance forms. "You have until May 12th to vacate," the marshal said. "After that, we'll return with the keys." I nodded, voice firm. "Understood." They left, and I stepped outside, watching the raindrops blur Nathan's sedan. The power of the law had joined my own resolve. I wasn't just a father betrayed. I was a man reclaiming his life. Back in my room, I placed the sealed envelopes in a protective folder. Then I sent a quick message to Margaret, all served. "Let's prepare for hearings." I closed my laptop and headed to bed, the rain easing to a soft patter. The motel room felt smaller now, but not confining. It was the cockpit from which I would pilot the rest of this journey, and for the first time since that spring afternoon, I knew I wouldn't falter. I'd walk every step with dignity, and I'd do it on my own terms. The morning after the papers were served, a quiet determination settled over me like a well-worn coat. I slipped into yesterday's suit, dark gray, a touch too big, now that I'd lost some of the weight that stress and late-night meals had put on, and headed down to the lobby for coffee. The night manager, Steve Brennan, greeted me with a knowing nod. "Looks like things are moving," he said quietly as he poured steaming Java into my travel mug. I nodded, tracing the rim of the mug with my thumb. "They are." Outside drizzle dusted the parking lot, turning the neon vacancy sign into a watery smear. I walked to my Buick, cradling the coffee. The engine fired on the first turn, its familiar rumble a comfort. I drove downtown past the florist and the bakery toward the courthouse where my next act would play out. Inside the brick building, the clerk's window was a flurry of activity. I handed over the stamped eviction and restraining order documents to a stern-faced woman whose glasses perched on the tip of her nose. "Your hearing is scheduled for May 15th at 10 Hoserer," she said, tapping the papers. I tucked the copies into my briefcase. "Thank you," I replied, feeling the electric jolt of officialdom. My case was now firmly lodged in the judicial system. I found an empty seat in the public gallery and waited, watching familiar faces trickle in, Judge Randall's bailiff, my attorney Margaret Summers reviewing notes, and Detective Morrison greeting the court reporter. At precisely 10, the bailiff announced the judge's entrance. The gavel fell sharp. "Court is now in session. Carlson versus Pierce." "Mr. Carlson, you may proceed." I stood, heart hammering in my chest. Margaret stepped forward. In 2 clear pages, she laid out the facts: Nathan Pierce's attempted mortgage fraud, the ultimatum, forcing me from my home, and the pattern of intimidation culminating in the restraining order. I watched Nathan and Emily sit together at the defense table, his posture rigid, her shoulders hunched. Margaret's voice never wavered. When it was my turn, the judge nodded toward me. "Mr. Carlson, you may take the stand." I crossed to the witness box, my legs feeling oddly light. I swore the oath, then met the judge's steady gaze. "Your Honor, I've lived at 472 Elm Street for 40 years. I began, voice steady but thick with emotion. My late wife and I refinished those floors. We painted those walls. I paid the mortgage, utilities, and property taxes for decades. 3 years ago, my daughter and son-in-law moved in with my blessing, financial support from my retirement savings. But last month, they demanded I obey Mr. Pierce's commands or leave my own home. I complied because I refused to accept that ultimatum. Then I discovered Mr. Pierce had attempted to mortgage my property without my knowledge using forged documents. I stand before you asking only to reclaim my home and my right to peace." The courtroom was silent, except for the scratch of a stenographer's keys. Judge Randall's expression softened. "Mr. Pierce and Ms. Pierce," he said, addressing the defendants, "your conduct constitutes a clear violation of your father's rights. I hereby grant Mr. Carlson's request, the eviction remains in effect, and the restraining order is affirmed. You are ordered to vacate the property immediately and barred from any contact with Mr. Carlson." He rapped the gavel. Court adjourned. A low murmur rose as spectators gathered their things. I exhaled, muscles uncoiling for the first time in weeks. Margaret slipped me a file folder with the final judgment. "Congratulations," she whispered. "You did it." Outside, I bumped into Pastor Williams on the courthouse steps. He offered me his arm. "May God bless your new beginning." I clasped his forearm. "Thank you, Pastor." Driving back to Pine Lodge, I felt both victorious and hollow. The eviction was legal in limbo until Nathan and Emily found a new place, but the house itself was now off limits. Elm Street would stand as a monument to years of love betrayal and hard-won justice. What would I do now? Back at the motel, the phone buzzed with messages. One from Mrs. Henderson expressing relief that the truth prevailed. Another from Bob Harrison, inviting me for coffee at Annie's tomorrow to catch up. Even Margaret sent a cheerful text. "Dinner tonight, we'll celebrate." My heart warmed. I wasn't alone. That evening, as rain pattered against the window, I took a long shower and changed into a clean shirt. Meeting Margaret at Annie's felt like stepping into a new world. She greeted me with a hug and a glass of wine. To reclaim dignity, she toasted. I clinked glasses. To fresh starts. She smiled. "What's next for you?" she asked. I gazed out the diner window at the darkened street. I'm not sure I admitted, but I want to build something new, maybe a smaller place by the lake, a space that isn't haunted by betrayal." Margaret nodded. "I'll help you find a good deal." We talked through possibilities. Condos, cabins, a cozy cottage. The conversation gave me a strange thrill, life plans beyond legal battles. When I returned to my room, I found a text from Detective Morrison. "We've compiled the fraud evidence into a package for the district attorney. They'll review charges next week." Another weight lifted. Nathan was finally facing criminal consequences, not just eviction. Yet a deeper concern lingered. My relationship with Emily, in the aftermath of court questions, remained. Would she reach out in remorse? Could our bond survive such rupture? I stared at the ceiling, willing the unanswered call into my phone. The next morning, sunlight crept through the curtains. Pine Lodge felt less like exile and more like a stepping stone to something real. I packed my briefcase for another day. Lender calls, real estate research, a meeting with a realtor Margaret recommended. My future was unfolding. Before leaving, I stopped by the front desk to settle my bill. Steve Brennan looked surprised. "You're upgrading?" he teased. I grinned. "Maybe soon, but for now you've been a good neighbor." He handed me a cup of fresh coffee. "Stay strong, Bob." I raised the mug. "Thank you, Steve." As I stepped out into the cool morning air, I took a deep breath. The road ahead would have its twists. Legal hearings, real estate showings, maybe even a criminal trial. But I had regained control. Dignity was more than a word. It was the compass, guiding me forward, one purposeful step at a time. The morning after celebrating with Margaret, I woke before dawn, the motel's silence wrapping around me like a promise. I dressed quietly, jeans, a plaid shirt Linda once picked out, and carried my coffee to the window. The parking lot glistened with overnight rain. My Buick sat nearby, a faithful ally. Today, I would start building the next chapter of my life. I checked my phone, a text from Detective Morrison. "District Attorney reviewing fraud charges. Will update you soon." I closed my eyes, relief and anticipation swirling together. Justice was no longer abstract. It was imminent. Downstairs, I found Steve Brennan pouring coffee. He greeted me with a nod. "Ready for the realtor?" he asked, noting my purposeful stride. "Yeah," I said, accepting a cup. "I want to see that lakeside cabin today." The drive to Clearwater Realty took me past familiar storefronts, Shaw's Hardware, Millie's Bakery, town landmarks that once symbolized routine. Now they felt like waypoints on a journey toward freedom. I parked beside a young realtor named Claire Thompson, no relation, who waved from the sidewalk. She wore a crisp blazer and a clipboard. "Good morning, Mr. Carlson," Claire said, extending her hand. "I think you'll like what we found." I followed her into the office, where a set of photos glimmered on an easel, a two-bedroom cabin perched at the edge of Flathead Lake, weathered wood, and a wraparound deck facing towering pines. My heart quickened. "It's modest," Claire explained, "but solid construction, recently updated plumbing and electrical. And that view," she let the silence underscore the lake's aquamarine sweep. I traced the shoreline in the photo with a finger. "Comfortable, private," I murmured, "like it's been waiting for me." She smiled. "Let's take a look in person." Outside, sunlight broke through clouds, the promise of a clear day. The drive north was smooth. I rolled down the window and breathed pine-scented air each mile, pulling me farther from Elm Street and closer to a fresh start. When we arrived, I wandered the gravel driveway, suitcase in hand, from the Buick's trunk. The cabin's doors swung open before I could knock, and the previous owner, a retiree named Martha Dawson, greeted me warmly. "Bob Carlson, I understand you're interested." I nodded, extending my hand. Yes, it's a beautiful place. She ushered me inside where polished wood floors reflected morning light. My late husband and I built this in '72. We raised our kids here just like you did on Elm. I think it's good you'll have it now. Her kindness brought tears to my eyes. Thank you for showing me. We toured the 2 bedrooms, the compact kitchen, and finally the deck overlooking the lake. The water lapped at a small dock. A fishing boat bobbed gently. I inhaled deeply. This was home before the struggle, a sanctuary. Claire cleared her throat. Ready to discuss terms, I turned from the view voice, steady. Yes, let's do it. Back in town, I met Margaret for lunch at Annie's. I slid into the booth with a grin. I found it, I said, tapping the brochure. The cabin, it's mine if the sale goes through. She beamed. Perfect choice. Ready to sign? I nodded, feeling the lingering excitement. This afternoon. Her pen flew across the paperwork. Congratulations, Bob. This is truly your fresh start. I exhaled, the weight of years lifting. I need that. Later in the lawyer's office, I signed closing documents, Margaret guiding each signature. The cabin, my refuge, became mine deed and all. I felt pride and relief, entwined stronger than earlier anxiety. That evening, I returned to Pine Lodge only to discover 2 sealed envelopes waiting on my door, one from Nathan's defense attorney, demanding a stay on the eviction, the other from the district attorney's office, formally charging Nathan Pierce with attempted mortgage fraud and forgery. My pulse raced at the sight of those words, legal vindication, in black and white. The next morning, I drove to the DA's office. Inside, Assistant District Attorney Chen greeted me. Mr. Carlson, thank you for your cooperation. We'll be scheduling a preliminary hearing within 2 weeks. I nodded. I appreciate the prompt action. She handed me a file, witness summaries, bank records, Nathan's application with forged signatures. Your testimony will be critical. I tucked the file into my briefcase. I understand. Walking to my car, I felt the intensified pressure on Nathan criminal charges, eviction restraining order. His world was unraveling and his isolation matched mine in reverse. While I found community support, he faced collapsing alliances. That afternoon, the phone rang. It was Emily. My heart tightened, but I steadied myself. Hello, sweetheart. Her voice quavered. Dad, I need to talk. I paused, recalling her silence since that ultimatum. I'm listening, she swallowed audibly. I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to go this far. Nathan's been struggling, but that doesn't excuse how we treated you. I regret it every day. I closed my eyes. Her apology carried pain and truth. I appreciate that, Emily. But I need more than words. I need to feel safe and respected. She sniffled. I know. I'm working on it. Nathan's in rehab for gambling addiction and I'm starting therapy. I hope you'll consider letting me visit. My chest tightened with hope and caution. I want us to heal, but it will take time. No promises, but we can start with a call this weekend. Thank you, Dad. Her relief was palpable. I hung up, leaning against the kitchen counter in my cabin, the lake light dancing on the walls. The words we'd exchanged felt like the first bricks of a new bridge between us. In the following days, I settled into routines at the cabin, early morning fishing afternoons, rebuilding my late wife's favorite garden box evenings, reading by the wood stove. Pine Lodge faded from memory, replaced by a genuine sense of belonging. On Saturday morning, Emily called at the promised time. We spoke for an hour, her voice honest, full of remorse and cautious optimism. When we hung up, I felt the fragile beginnings of a renewed relationship. Later, Detective Morrison texted Nathan, entered a plea agreement. Expect sentencing in 30 days, restoring fraud charges for you. Another relief, he would face real consequences for his betrayal. That evening, I stood on the cabin deck, the sun setting in gold and rose across the lake. I raised a glass of iced tea in quiet salute to the day's victories. Legal justice reclaimed home, cautious reconciliation with my daughter. As twilight deepened, I whispered into the wind, "Here's to new beginnings." And the lake reflected back, steady and true, as though approving the promise I'd just made to protect my dignity, to rebuild my family, and to live the rest of my days on my terms. The morning light filtered through the cabin's pine-framed windows, casting ripples across the hardwood floor. I sat at the small kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee cradled between my hands, and stared at my reflection in the lake beyond. It was impossible to believe that just weeks earlier I'd been shackled by fear and manipulation driven from my own home by the people I trusted most. Now here I was in a place I'd chosen, surrounded by the quiet strength of forest and water, plotting the final steps of this long ordeal. Nathan's sentencing hearing, Emily's next visit, and the promise of a relationship rebuilt on honesty rather than obligation. My phone buzzed a morning text from Detective Morrison. Sentencing set for June 20th at 9 a.m. You're welcome to attend. I exhaled the date, both relief and dread. Justice would be served, but watching Nathan stand before the judge would dredge up memories I'd rather leave behind. Still, I owed it to myself to see the process through. I stood and poured the last of my coffee into a thermos, adding a pat of butter to keep it warm on the porch. I stepped outside, the crisp air sharpening every sense. The loons called across the water, and a pair of bald eagles circled overhead. Nature's peace was a balm, but my mind buzzed with logistics, travel arrangements, lodging near the courthouse, coordinating with Margaret and Morrison. Lost in thought, I almost missed the knock on the door. I opened it to find Emily standing on the deck, her shoulders wrapped in a knit shawl against the morning chill. She looked smaller than I remembered, paler around the eyes, tentative. "Dad," she said quietly, "I slept in my car when I drove up last night. I stepped aside. Come in." She entered the familiar cabin, smells of pine and cedar greeting her. She set down a battered overnight bag. "Thank you for letting me visit." I gestured to the kitchen. "Coffee." She nodded, and I poured her a cup. We moved to the table where the sun warmed the corner nearest the window. For a moment, silence reigned, each of us calibrating how to proceed. Finally, Emily spoke. "I've been in therapy, individual and couples. Nathan's in a rehabilitation program for his gambling addiction. I asked you before if you'd visit. I want to prove I'm serious." Her voice trembled. "I want to earn your trust." My chest tightened. I'd heard words before, promises made and broken, but her tone carried vulnerability rather than entitlement. "Talk to me," I said softly. She took a breath, curling her fingers around the mug. "I miss you, Dad. I miss our Sunday breakfasts, your laughter when I brought you those cherry danishes we both loved." Her eyes glistened. "I was so proud of that cabin you found. I felt like I wanted to chase my own life, so crowded with Nathan's problems and demands that I forgot how much you cared." Tears pricked my eyes. "What changed?" She exhaled. "I realized that people who love you don't humiliate you. They don't treat you like a servant in your own home. And when I saw the eviction order in court, I understood just how far I'd let us drift apart. I didn't want that for our family." I studied her face, seeing the earnestness there. I've seen the changes your therapy Detective Morrison's calls about Nathan's rehab, Margaret's paperwork for divorce proceedings. But trust is built in moments, not promises. She nodded. I know. That's why I'm here. This week I want to help you around the cabin, your garden, your fishing gear. Small things, actions instead of words. I felt a slow warmth replace the caution in my chest. All right, let's start with those flower boxes you helped me pot last season. Her smile was tentative but real. I remember. Lupines and daisies. I nodded and led her out through the kitchen past the door that opened to a small garden plot. I retrieved a set of gardening gloves and gave her a pair. Let's get to work. We spent the morning kneeling in the soil, her handing me trowels, me digging holes for new perennials. Conversation flowed in bursts. Childhood memories, Linda's favorite recipes, the grandchildren she hoped to have one day. The work was meditative, each plant a symbol of renewal. By noon the garden looked more vibrant. I wiped dirt from my brow and reached for a bottle of water. Thank you, I said. This means more than you know. She pressed my arm. Thank you for letting me help. We sat on the deck with sandwiches and crisp lemonade, watching sunlight dance on the lake. For a moment I allowed myself to imagine a future where this cabin belonged to two generations, not defined by conflict, but by reconciliation. But duty called. I checked the date. The sentencing was just days away. Emily, I have to travel next week for the hearing, I said, gently. I'll need you to stay here until I return. Pine Lodge is full, but you're welcome to stay at the cabin of an old friend just down the road. Her face clouded with hesitation. I'll be alone. I shook my head. I'll arrange for Pastor Williams to stop by and I'll check in every night. You're not alone. Tears gathered. Thank you, Dad. The next day I returned to town. In the courthouse district, traffic hummed and people bustled. After parking, I walked to a modest bed and breakfast where Margaret had booked a room for me. She greeted me at the door with a hug. You look resolved, she said, ushering me inside. And slightly older. I laughed. Courtrooms age you, I said, then added, Thank you for being here. She handed me a folder. Here are the final briefs and the victim impact statement. Have you decided whether to read it aloud? I held the paper. My statement detailed betrayal by the man I'd welcomed into my home, the erosion of family bonds, and the rebuilding of my life. Yes, I said. I need to say this. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I'll be there. Morning came swiftly. I entered the courtroom before 9 a.m. wearing the same dark suit that felt like armor. The bailiff herded spectators to the gallery, and I took my seat at the plaintiff's table. Emily sat behind me, pale eyes bright with unshed tears. Margaret gave me an encouraging nod. The judge arrived and called the session. Nathan shuffled in, looking gaunt, his lawyer beside him. My breath hitched as the bailiff read the charges and sentencing guidelines. Nathan's attorney spoke first, requesting a lenient sentence due to his client's addiction and remorse. Their plea was familiar redemption wrapped in suffering. Then, and only then, I rose. I walked to the lectern, the gallery silent, except for the creak of my shoes. I cleared my throat, trembling but determined. Your Honor, I appreciate that Mr. Pierce is in a difficult place. I began. Addiction is a serious disease, and I do not wish him harm. But I also ask the court to recognize the gravity of his actions. He attempted to steal the home my late wife and I built. He issued ultimatums that forced me from my own house. He exploited my love for my family to fuel his gambling, And when the law intervened, he needed force and paperwork to remove me. Emotions caught my voice, but I forged ahead. I believe in second chances, but only when accountability is real. I ask for a sentence that includes restitution, community service, and treatment, so that he can learn to rebuild his own life without harming others. The judge listened, face impassive. When I finished, I returned to my seat. Emily reached across, squeezing my hand. Her eyes brimmed with pride. The judge spoke at length, reviewing case law, sentencing guidelines, and Nathan's willingness to enter treatment. Finally, he pronounced, Nathan Pierce is sentenced to 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory gambling counseling, and full restitution to Mr. Carlson. He banged the gavel. This court is adjourned. A hush fell. Then the gallery erupted in muted applause, mostly from my supporters. Emily wept quietly, and I exhaled the tension of weeks. Margaret patted my shoulder. Detective Morrison offered a knowing nod from across the room. Outside the courthouse, sunlight felt sharper, as though the world had shifted. Emily and I embraced. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." I held her tighter than I had in years. "I'm proud of you," I said, "and proud of all of us for standing up and seeing this through." We walked to the car in companionable silence, the weight of the past lifting with each step. My phone buzzed a message from Claire, the realtor, congratulating me on the cabin's final paperwork. Everything was in place. As I drove back to the lakeside cabin, Emily beside me, I realized that my journey, having started with betrayal, had led to something surprisingly better, a home not built on need and obligation, but on choice and integrity. And with every turn of the road, I felt more certain that this new life was mine, and mine alone, to cherish and protect. I woke before dawn again, but this time the reason wasn't anxiety. The pale tip of sun hovered over the pines, and I felt a quiet anticipation in my chest. Emily was still asleep on the pull-out couch, a soft snore drifting from the living room. I made coffee and stepped onto the deck, the first hints of sunlight turning the lake to molten gold. The world felt new, as though everything since that courtroom moment had been prologue to a story I'd finally begun to write myself. I poured a cup and leaned against the railing, watching mist lift from the water. Memories of Elm Street seemed distant now, like chapters in someone else's life. Here in this cabin, the air was fresh with pine needles and possibility. My phone buzzed, Detective Morrison, checking that I had everything I needed for the final restitution paperwork. I tapped out a quick reply, all set. "Thank you." Then I tucked the phone away. Mornings were sacred, not to be shared with bureaucratic tasks. A rustle behind me made me turn. Emily emerged, pulling on a sweater. She wore my late wife's old scarf, the one Linda loved on chilly mornings. I passed her the second mug. "Morning," I said softly. "Morning, Dad," she replied, accepting the coffee. She wrapped her hands around the mug and inhaled. "This is perfect." We stood side by side, sipping in companionable silence. Then Emily cleared her throat. I wanted to thank you again for staying in my life," she said quietly. "I know I have a lot to make up for." Her vulnerability struck me. I rested a hand on her shoulder. "You're here," I said. "That's a good start." She smiled, relief brightening her eyes. "I've thought a lot about what dignity really means. It's not just for me, it's for our relationship." I nodded, feeling that thread of connection strengthen. "I agree." We set our mugs on the deck table and moved inside to plan the day. The garden needed weeding before planting season, and my fishing boat's oiled oars were calling my name. Emily offered to help me with both, and this time I welcomed it as a gift, not a chore. By mid-morning we were kneeling among the lupines we'd planted together last season. The soil was cool and damp, promising new growth. I handed her the trowel, and we worked side by side, exchanging stories. She told me about her therapy sessions, how she'd learned to recognize manipulative patterns and set healthy boundaries. I shared memories of Linda's gardening tips, the way she'd pinch back spent blooms to encourage more blossoms. Our conversation was easy and rich, the kind you only have when trust begins to reseed itself. After lunch, grilled cheese and tomato soup, I retrieved my fishing gear. "Want to join me?" I asked. Emily's eyes lit up. "I'd love to." We drove the dusty road to the small dock where my boat waited. The lake was glassy, reflecting blue sky and drifting clouds. I handed her a life vest. "First rule," I said, "no standing, just in case." She laughed as I pushed us off, and we drifted into deeper water. Casting lines became a dance, her laughter when she missed a cast, my gentle correction. No fish bit for the first hour, but we didn't mind. Conversation turned to future plans, a family reunion at the cabin next summer, perhaps inviting grandchildren. Her face glowed with the idea, hope rising in her chest. Then her bobber dipped, and she jerked the rod. "I got one," she cried. A small rainbow trout flipped at the end of her line. I guided her through the fight, and soon she held the fish out with pride. "Release it," I reminded her. She nodded, and we watched it slip back into the lake. Her smile was triumphant, the kind I'd missed seeing. By dusk, we were back on the deck, a simple supper of pasta and wine waiting. The kitchen glowed with my grandmother's copper pans, and I poured us each a glass. "To new traditions," I said, raising my glass. She toasted me. "To second chances." We ate as the sky turned crimson and lavender. Fireflies blinked in the garden, tiny lanterns floating among the bushes. Conversation turned serious. "Dad," Emily began, "I've been thinking about our boundaries. I want to respect your space here. This cabin isn't Elm Street." I set my fork down. "I appreciate that." "What do you have in mind?" She took a breath. "I'll only visit when I call ahead. And if I stay too long, you can tell me it's your home now, not mine to fill." Her eyes held sincerity. "I want to rebuild trust, not strain it." A swell of pride rose in me. "That's fair," I said. "And I promise to communicate, too. If I need time alone, I'll tell you." She nodded relief, shading her features. "Thank you, Dad." We lingered over our wine, speaking of lighter things. Books we'd read, movies to watch the family reunion menu. The comfortable intimacy felt like balm to the wounds of recent months. Later, I took a phone call from the Veterans Housing Coordinator. The families were settling into Elm Street apartments, laughter echoing from their yards. The house I'd sold had become 3 units of safe shelter, exactly what I'd hoped. The coordinator thanked me again, and I pictured the veterans' children playing where my daughter and grandchildren might one day run. Service and sacrifice honored in bricks and mortar. As night deepened, Emily gathered her mug and wrapped herself in the plaid blanket draped over the couch. I brought her a second blanket and sat beside her. "How do you feel?" I asked. She sighed contentedly. "Hopeful," she said, "and grateful." I studied her face, brave changed, but still my daughter, that child I'd held close during thunderstorms. "I'm proud of you," I told her. She smiled and leaned her head on my shoulder. "It's just the beginning, isn't it?" I kissed the top of her head. "A very good beginning." And as we sat under the cabin's soft lamplight listening to the lake's gentle breathing, I realized that the greatest triumph wasn't the eviction or the fraud conviction. It was this fragile, glowing promise of a father and daughter healing together one dawn and one decision at a time. The next morning, the alarm on my phone buzzed me awake just before sunrise. I lingered in bed for a moment listening to the distant call of a loon across the lake, then slipped out of the covers and dressed quietly. Today would be a day of practical matters. Emily and I needed to finalize her divorce paperwork, and I had promised to help her set up a new bank account in her own name. But first, coffee. In the kitchen, I poured 2 mugs and carried them onto the deck. The mist still hovered low over the water, and Emily emerged from the living room wrapped in a shawl. She took her mug in both hands and inhaled deeply. "I love mornings here," she said. "Me too," I agreed. "Ready to tackle paperwork?" She nodded. "Let's do it before the world wakes up." We headed into town, cabin keys in hand, and I drove us straight to the law office where Margaret had set up a conference room. Sunlight filtered through tall windows as we settled at a polished table strewn with forms. Margaret appeared with a welcoming smile, coffee mugs in hand. "Ready?" she asked. Emily took a breath. "Yes." Over the next hour, Margaret guided us through each form, the final divorce decree splitting assets, fairly changing names on titles, and clearing Nathan's name from any lingering obligations. Emily signed with a steady hand. When she finished, Margaret stamped the documents and handed them back. "Congratulations," she said. "You're legally you again?" Emily exhaled relief, shining on her face. "Thank you, both of you." She looked at me. "I couldn't have done this without you." I offered a small smile. "You did the work." Margaret closed her notebook. "Just remember, Emily, boundaries are your friend. You have everything you need now, your own finances, your own home. Use them wisely." We drove back to the cabin in companionable silence, sunlight warming the dashboard. Emily sat quietly as though savoring the morning's successes. When we pulled into the gravel drive, we realized something was wrong. The cabin door was ajar. My heart lurched. "Stay here," I whispered. I set my coffee down and walked forward, each step echoing on the porch boards. I pushed the door gently, peered inside, and my breath caught at the sight of boxes, overturned papers scattered across the floor. "Dad," Emily's voice trembled behind me. I turned and motioned her inside. "Call Detective Morrison," she nodded, hand shaking as she dug in her purse for her phone. As she dialed, I stepped into the cabin and surveyed the damaged drawers, open clothes, tossed my journals from the Elm Street case strewn across the couch. Whoever had done this was searching for something, likely Emily's newly signed divorce papers or the files relating to Nathan's fraud case. "Detective, it's Emily Carlson," she said once the line connected. "Someone broke into the cabin. Dad's files, they're all over the place." Detective Morrison's calm voice crackled through the speaker. "I'm on my way. Lock the doors and stay inside." "Okay," she said, hanging up. She pressed her back against the wall, eyes wide with fear. What now? I approached her, crouching to her level. "We stay calm. He's gone now. We'll let the detective sort it out." Together we secured the doors and windows, then sat at the kitchen table with coffee growing cold. Emily's voice broke. "I thought it was over, that Nathan would leave us alone once the divorce was final." I reached for her hand. "People like him don't stop until consequences catch up. We've lined up the restraining order, the criminal charges now this. It's harassment and it's illegal." Minutes later, Detective Morrison arrived, flashing his badge and calling for a uniformed officer to secure the scene. He examined the cabin with methodical care, noting footprints in the dusty entryway and photographing disturbed papers. He asked questions. Had we seen anyone loitering? Any phone threats? Emily provided her phone records from the night before. No calls. No texts. Morrison sighed. I'll have forensics run this and circulate a bolo. But we should assume Nathan is escalating. He turned to me. You might consider staying at the B&B for a few nights until we can be sure he's not lurking. I nodded. Understood. After they left, Emily and I packed a bag for her and one for me. We drove into town and checked into the B&B. Margaret recommended an old Victorian with friendly staff and sturdy locks. Once inside, we collapsed on separate beds, exhaustion settling in. That evening, over takeout in our room, we reviewed what to do next. I don't want to give him the satisfaction, Emily said between bites of chicken salad, but I also don't want to live in fear. I laid a hand over hers. We're stronger than this. You've reclaimed your life. I've reclaimed my dignity. We'll let the law handle the rest. The following days passed in a blur of routine and precaution. I visited the prosecutor's office to provide updated statements for the criminal case. Emily met with a financial advisor to secure her assets, and Detective Morrison increased patrols around the cabin. Each phone call and each meeting built a buffer against Nathan's threats. On Friday morning, I received a call from the DA's office. Nathan's plea agreement had been amended to include sentencing for harassment and breaking and entering. Restitution would cover damages, and he'd face an additional 100 hours of community service. Good news, but tempered by the knowledge that the process still stretched ahead. That afternoon, Margaret invited us to Annie's for coffee and pie. We sat in our favorite booth as sunlight slanted through the windows. The warm familiarity felt healing. Emily picked at her cherry pie, and I savored every crumb of coconut cream. We talked about lighter plans, her new carpentry hobby. My desire to paint the deck railings this summer, and the conversation felt both grounded and hopeful. As we left the diner, Emily paused on the sidewalk. She looked at me, gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you for everything, protecting me, supporting me. I know this has been hard on you, too. My throat tightened. You're worth it, I said. Family means more than comfort. It means standing up for each other no matter what. She nodded. I'll never forget that. That evening, we returned to the cabin. The locks clicked firmly, and for the first time since the break-in, the cabin felt safe again. Emily stood at the doorway, inhaling the pine-scented air. I miss this place, she said, her voice soft. I smiled, closing the door behind us. Me too. In the days that followed, we resumed life at the lake, morning fishing afternoons, tending the garden evenings by the wood stove. The cabin became a sanctuary once more, not just for me, but for us both. The shadows of Elm Street disappeared in the bright sunlight of these pines. Late one afternoon, as fireflies blinked in the dusk, we placed a small plaque on the porch railing, rebuilt on trust. June 2025. It was a simple marker of a profound journey of ultimatum and eviction justice and reconciliation. As the plaque caught the last light, I felt a deep sense of closure. Nathan's threats were neutralized, the legal cases moving toward resolution, and Emily and I had stitched the tear in our relationship with honesty and effort. Boundaries were firmly in place, but so was a new bond, one forged in adversity and healed with love. That night we sat in rocking chairs under the stars. Emily rested her head on my shoulder. I'm not sure what tomorrow brings, she whispered. I kissed the top of her head. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. And, as the lake's gentle lullaby drifted over us, I knew we had found something stronger than any ultimatum, a family renewed by dignity and choice, ready for whatever chapters lay ahead. The morning sun slanted across the deck as I poured a fresh cup of coffee, its steam rising in gentle spirals. The lake lay still like polished glass reflecting a pastel sky. I took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle into my chest, and thought about how far we'd come. Just days ago, I'd watched Nathan stand before the judge while Emily and I sat shoulder to shoulder in the gallery. His probation and restitution marked the end of one chapter, and now this serene cabin marked the beginning of another. Inside, Emily emerged from her room, tying her hair loosely back. She wore a simple sweatshirt and jeans, practical, unpretentious, and entirely herself. "Morning, Dad," she said, accepting a mug. "Did you sleep well?" "Like a log," I replied, smiling. "You better than I have in years." She hugged me, her arms light but full of meaning. "Thank you for letting me stay." I kissed the top of her head. "You've made this place your own, you know. I'm proud of you." Over breakfast, oatmeal with fresh berries from the garden, we laid out our plans for the day. I had a meeting at the Veterans Housing Complex to check on the families moving into Elm Street. Emily wanted to visit the local bookstore that sold antique fishing gear. It felt delightful to carve out separate plans under the same roof. I drove into town first, the gravel crunching under my tires as I pulled into the new parking area beside the converted duplexes. 3 veteran families had moved in a few weeks ago, each unit freshly painted and landscaped. I greeted the on-site coordinator, Mrs. Patel, who gave me a quick tour. Children played in the shared yard as their parents chatted on the porch. "Mr. Carlson." Mrs. Patel said they're thriving. "The last family just completed job training thanks to your donation and the community's support." My heart swelled. "I'm honored to help." We walked down the sidewalk where the air was thick with laughter. One of the veterans, Sergeant Diaz, approached, noon whistle in hand. He shook my hand firmly. "Sir, this place saved my family. My kids have a yard to run in again, and I've got steady work." I nodded, vision blurring with unshed tears. That's all I ever wanted. Sergeant Diaz patted my shoulder and returned inside. I lingered a moment, watching the comings and goings, an ordinary suburban rhythm infused with extraordinary gratitude. Then I headed back to the cabin, humming an old hymn Linda and I used to sing in church. When I arrived home, Emily was outside kneeling by the flower boxes we'd planted together. She looked up and waved. "Found something interesting." I set my keys down and joined her. She held a worn, leather-bound journal, the one I used to track every mortgage payment. "I found this in the den," she explained. I wanted to read it together. I opened the cover, the binding creaking like a familiar song. Inside were pages of neat entries, dates, amounts, check numbers, and occasional notes about Tiffany's tuition or Nathan's emergency car repair. But scattered among the financial records were brief, poignant reminders Linda and I bought tomato plants. Today, Emily's first swim lesson, June 5, 1995. Family hike at Glacier Park, August 2010. Tears pricked my eyes. Linda documented our lives as much as our money. Emily traced her finger over a line. "I remember that hike. You carried me when I twisted my ankle." I nodded. I wouldn't trade those memories for anything. We sat on the garden bench, reading the journal aloud, reliving moments of joy and simplicity. Each entry was a gift, a reminder that home was more than walls and roof. It was shared laughter and unwavering support. By afternoon, the cabin was filled with the scent of fresh-baked bread, Emily's culinary experiment, and the comfortable buzz of friendly conversation. I paused in the doorway as she invited an old neighbor, Mrs. Henderson and Pastor Williams, for a simple gathering. The living room brimmed with familiar faces: Margaret Summers, Detective Morrison, even Steve Brennan from Pine Lodge. Emily had organized a thank-you tea to honor those who'd helped us rebuild. Mrs. Henderson pressed a plate of scones into my hand. "You deserve this, Robert," she said, "for your generosity and for showing us what real family means." I smiled, voice thick. "Thank you, dear. It's been my honor." Pastor Williams raised his teacup. "To new beginnings and the grace that guides us through trials." We echoed the toast cups clinking. The warmth of their presence felt like a living tapestry, threads of kindness woven into the fabric of our new life. As evening settled, the guests departed with hugs and waves. Emily and I stood on the porch, hands linked. The sky gleamed with stars, the lake mirroring each pinprick of light. A soft breeze carried fireflies dancing in the garden. "I think I'm ready to move forward," Emily said, leaning into me. I nodded. "Me too. We've honored the past and claimed the future." She smiled, eyes shining in the starlight. "Will you help me pick out carpet for my new apartment next week?" I chuckled. "I'd love to, though I might leave the color choices to you." She laughed, and it sounded like home. Just then my phone buzzed, Detective Morrison's name on the screen. I answered. "All clear here," he reported. "Nathan's final sentencing hearing went smoothly. He's been ordered to continue rehab and complete his service hours. No new incidents." Relief washed over me. "Thank you, Jim. Happy to help. Enjoy that peace you've earned." I hung up and turned back to Emily. "It's finally over." She rested her head on my shoulder. "No, Dad. It's finally beginning," and as we stood beneath the Milky Way's glow, I felt a profound gratitude for justice served, for family mended, and for the quiet promise that this cabin by the lake, this sanctuary born of hardship, would be the setting for our brightest days yet. The next morning, I woke to birdsong, not the muted loons on the lake, but the insistent chirp of sparrows flitting through the cabin's pines. I stretched and slipped on yesterday's flannel, then padded into the kitchen where Emily was already brewing coffee. The rich aroma trailed behind her as she carried 2 mugs to the small table. "Morning, Dad," she said, her smile bright in the dawn light. "Morning, sweetie," I replied, accepting the mug. I took a careful sip, steaming strong, and let it ground me. "What's on your agenda today?" She set her mug down, her expression thoughtful. "I thought we could start planning the summer reunion. You know Grandma Linda would have loved seeing cousins all together again." I nodded, the memory of Linda's laughter at our last family picnic washing over me. "I'd like that." We pulled out a notebook and sketched a guest list, menu ideas, and weekend dates. Conversation fluttered from hot dog stands to which veterans we'd invite back to Elm Street. The act of planning felt like weaving our lives forward, knitting new memories where old ones had frayed. By mid-morning, I stepped outside to inspect the garden boxes we'd planted, lupines, daisies, and now bold zinnias stretching toward the sky. Emily followed heels, crumbling gravel notebook in hand. "I was thinking we could add a sunflower patch along the north edge," she said. "They draw in bees and look amazing in photos." I touched a zinnia's petal, its velvet bright under my fingertip. "That sounds wonderful." As we kneaded soil and sowed seeds, our conversation drifted to lighter topics. Emily's new woodworking hobby, she'd built a garden bench from reclaimed pine, and my plans to try stand-up paddleboarding on the lake next week. Later after lunch, fresh tomato salad and grilled chicken, Emily headed into town to pick up ice and fresh produce for the reunion, leaving me with an afternoon of solitude. I retrieved my fishing rod and tiptoed down to the dock, the wood planks warm beneath my bare feet. The water shimmered like glass, and I cast a line watching the bobber drift lazily as I thought about the reunion. Family reunions could be messy old tensions creeping out when corners of memory brushed raw spots. But I believed in the healing power of shared laughter, and after everything we needed laughter more than ever. Suddenly my bobber dipped sharply. I set the hook and reeled in a fat rainbow trout. My heart raced with the excitement that hadn't visited me in years. I landed the fish on the dock, its body glistening with silver. I gently released it back into the lake, watching its tail flick before it vanished beneath the surface. Smiling, I sat back and closed my eyes, the rhythm of waves against the dock lulling me into peace. A voice on the water startled me. "Mind if I join you?" I opened my eyes to see Sergeant Diaz gliding up in his small motorboat. He tied off at the cleat and climbed aboard with ease. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said, grinning. "I heard you were here." "Not at all," I said, motioning to the opposite end of the dock. "Glad to see you." He sat beside me, pulling out his fishing gear. "You know," he said, tying a hook, "I've been thinking about that housing complex. You've made a real difference." I shifted to face him. "I couldn't have done it without the community, Mrs. Patel, the church, even the hardware store folks." He nodded. "Still, you kicked it off. And now I've got a place to bring my kids where they can run free, and I've got my medicine at hand." He tapped his chest pocket. "That's life-changing." I felt a surge of gratitude. "I'm proud of you, Sergeant." He hooked his line and cast into the water. "You know, I've been wanting to say thanks in person, and maybe pick your brain how to help more vets around here." We talked for hours about outreach programs, job training, even the idea of a weekend skills fair at the cabin. Each suggestion felt like another ripple of justice and kindness spreading outward from my decision to leave Elm Street and start anew. By sunset, Emily returned bags of ice and crates of peaches tucked into the truck bed. She waved as she climbed onto the dock. "Found the best peaches at the roadside stand," she called. "Can't wait for you to try them." I stood and helped her carry the crates inland. She brushed sweat from her brow. "Sorry I'm late." "No apology needed," I said. "Perfect timing, actually." Inside, we put the peaches in a bowl and set them on the counter. Sunbursts of red and gold. Then Emily switched on the oven for a peach cobbler test run. The warm cinnamon scent filled the cabin, chasing away the chill of evening. We sipped iced tea on the deck as the stars emerged. The lake mirrored each twinkle, doubling the sky's grandeur. I turned to Emily. "You ready for a sunset toast?" She raised her glass. "To family old and new." We clinked, and the crystal note lingered in the night air. Later, after the cabin fell silent, I stepped outside alone, the cobbler tin still warm in my hands. I settled into the rocking chair, the scent of baked peaches drifting on the breeze. I thought of that first day I fled Elm Street with a suitcase in hand, angry but resolute, and how each step had led me here, a cabin by the lake, reconciliation with my daughter Justice for Nathan's betrayals, and a community thriving where veterans found shelter and dignity. The rocking chair creaked beneath me as I rocked gently. I closed my eyes and listened to the whisper of wind through pines, the echo of Emily's laughter in the kitchen, the soft hum of the water lapping at the dock. All around me was evidence that lives could be rebuilt, even after the deepest wounds. Tomorrow we'd begin preparations for the reunion, calling cousins, decorating the garden, testing the sound system for old vinyl records. But tonight I would savor this moment, a man who had lost his home, but found his purpose. A father whose relationship with his daughter had been nearly destroyed, but was now stronger than before. and a community that had emerged more united, more hopeful than ever. I raised the cobbler tin to the sky, a private salute to new beginnings. Then, with the lake's lullaby in my ears, I let sleep find me among pines, and promise ready for whatever dawn might bring. The morning of the reunion dawned bright and clear, the lake reflecting a flawless blue sky. I woke before Emily, drawn outside by the promise of celebration. The cabin deck smelled of pine and dew, and I poured a cup of coffee as I surveyed our handiwork. String lights draped between trees, folding chairs arranged on the lawn, and little signs marking food stations. Grandma Linda's Pie Bar, Veterans Corner, Kids Crafts. My heart thrummed with excitement and a flicker of nerves. Today we'd fill this place with laughter, stories, and the people who had mended our broken past. Emily stepped onto the deck, tying back her hair. She wore a sundress patterned with daisies, one of Linda's favorites, and carried a tray of fresh muffins. "Morning," she said, offering me a blueberry. "Last batch straight from the oven." I bit into it, the sweet crumb melting in my mouth. Perfect timing. Everything looks incredible. She surveyed the scene, pride shining in her eyes. "Thank you for trusting me to plan this." I smiled. "You've outdone yourself." Inside, the cabin buzzed with final preparations. Margaret Summers arranged name tags at the welcome table, patterning them alphabetically so guests could mingle easily. Detective Morrison lugged a portable speaker system for old vinyl tunes, while Sergeant Diaz and two veteran families anchored the Veterans Corner, setting up folding tables of donated care packages. Pastor Williams hovered nearby, blessing platters of sandwiches and offering last-minute words of encouragement. May this day be a testament to forgiveness and new beginnings. I joined him in the kitchen doorway. "Thank you for being here, Pastor." He patted my shoulder kindly. "It's my honor. This gathering will heal old wounds in more ways than one." Across the living room, Emily guided her cousin Rachel through a quick tutorial on the Polaroid camera. Rachel, a bride-to-be, flinched at every click, unaccustomed to analog quirks, but laughed as Emily reassured her, "It's about capturing the moment imperfectly. That's the point." By 10, the first arrivals trickled in, neighbors from the B&B families, from the veterans units, and a few of Emily's college friends who remembered me from Sunday breakfast long ago. Hugs and hellos filled the air. I stationed myself by the welcome sign and greeted each person, offering them name tags and iced tea. Every thank you for everything you've done warmed me more than the sun ever could. 11 o'clock brought the big moment. Our extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles, pulled up in a caravan of cars. Cousin Rick unloaded his homemade chili. Aunt Marge carried a trifle, and Cousin Sarah shepherded her 3 children toward the craft table. Emily and I exchanged elated glances as we watched the next generation dart between tables, laughter echoing like bells. The gathering formed a loose circle on the grass, folding chairs and blankets creating a patchwork. I stepped into the center, clearing my throat as everyone settled. Conversations hushed, and the only sound was the gentle breeze through the pines. My chest tightened with emotion. "Thank you all for coming," I began, voice steady despite the knot in my throat. "This cabin sits where I once felt exiled, but today it stands at the heart of our family's renewal. My late wife Linda built our home on Elm Street with love and sacrifice, and though that home was lost, the spirit of family endured. Thanks to all of you friends, neighbors, and family, we've built something new here." Heads nodded. Sergeant Diaz in uniform eyed me with respect. Emily stood beside me, hand on my arm. I'd especially like to acknowledge the veterans among us. I continued, gesturing toward the nearby tables. "Your service reminds us every day what sacrifice really means. This Veterans Corner is for you to share care packages, resources, and friendship." Applause broke out, and the veterans grinned, some wiping misty eyes. I breathed deeply. Now let's eat, laugh, and create memories worthy of Linda's pride. With that I stepped back, and the circle dissolved into chatter. I grabbed a plate of chili and trifle, then spotted Emily across the lawn. She waved me over, pointing to the craft table where her children's cousins were building popsicle stick cabins. I knelt to help them position the pieces, and my heart swelled at the sight of their unself-conscious joy. Mid-afternoon, the sun bore down. I slipped away to the shaded dock, coffee in hand, to breathe. The lake's surface rippled with small waves as children splashed in the shallows. Behind me, laughter flickered through the trees. I closed my eyes, letting the breeze whisper across my face. A sudden buzz startled me. It was my phone. Recharge the spirit, I thought. But I checked the screen, an unknown local number. Hesitating, I swiped to answer. "Hello?" I said, voice cautious. "Dad," a hoarse voice replied. My heart sank. "It's Nathan." Shock and anger surged. My grip tightened on the dock rail. "Nathan, why are you calling?" There was a pause, then he said in a low tone, I saw online about the reunion. I'm sorry. I lost everything: gambling debts, my job at the dealership. I've tried to get help, but I keep hitting rock bottom. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and if there's any way I could speak with you in person, I'd like that. My mind raced. This was the man who'd issued an ultimatum, tried to steal my home, broken into the cabin. But a small voice reminded me of Emily's journey, her therapy, her grasp of boundaries, and of my own sermon on forgiveness and new beginnings. I glanced at the cabin, a swarm of happy faces, the vibrant garden, Emily's beaming expression as she chatted with her cousin. A tidal pull of compassion rose in me. "Nathan," I said slowly, "we have a restraining order, you know that. But I recognize you're in crisis. If you want to make amends, you can start by speaking with your counselor and restitution officer. Show that you're serious about change. I won't meet you today, but you can send a written apology addressed to me and Emily and proof of counseling. Then we'll decide whether to talk further." He exhaled audibly. "Thank you. I'll do that." I ended the call and stared at the water. Did I just offer a lifeline? I felt both the weight of caution, years of betrayal, and the urgency of grace, like a prayer I once heard at Easter: love casts out fear. I pocketed the phone and returned to the celebration. Part of me remained guarded, but another part trembled with hope that even the darkest stories could find redemption. Emily greeted me with a grin. "Everything okay?" I swallowed and nodded. "Everything's changing." She squeezed my hand. "We're stronger for it." Later, as the last guests drifted away, children yawning, veterans waving, cousins hugging, I stood with Emily on the empty lawn. The string lights glimmered overhead like distant stars. "I got a call from Nathan," I said quietly. Her eyes widened. "What did he say?" I recounted the apology and my conditions. She exhaled. "Do you think we should give him that chance?" I paused, looking at the lights reflected in her eyes. "I think, yes, if he truly wants to change." She smiled, relief and cautious hope dancing across her features. "Then, let's see what tomorrow brings." As we packed up the chairs and swept the porch, I felt the day's joy braided with uncertainty. But I also felt the unmistakable pulse of possibility, proof that dignity and forgiveness could coexist. and as the cabin settled into stillness once more, I whispered into the night, "Here's to unfinished stories." The lake answered in a gentle ripple, as though agreeing that every ending is simply the start of something new. The morning after the reunion's last guest drove off, I woke before dawn once more, the lake a flat horizon of gray. I sat on the deck with my coffee, watching mist curl above the water. In the distance a loon called, not mournfully this time, but as if greeting the day. I reflected on Nathan's voicemail from last evening, promising an apology and proof of progress. Today, I would decide whether to open that door. Emily stepped onto the deck, still in sweats and a fleece hoodie. She carried 2 mugs of hot tea, her hands wrapped around the ceramic. "Morning," she said softly, offering me one. The steam and the warmth were a comfort. "Morning, sweetheart," I replied, and together we watched dawn's colors bloom across the sky. Neither of us spoke until the sun had fully risen, lighting the pines in gold. "I found it in the mail," Emily said, finally sliding her teacup aside. "Nathan's letter. And these." She held up a clear sheet protector with counseling receipts and restitution confirmation. "He's kept appointments, paid every dollar he owed." Her voice was tentative, as though afraid I'd dismiss it. I swallowed and took the documents, reading the neat print of a licensed therapist's office, dates, signatures, notes on sessions attended. Then a receipt from the county clerk's office, full restitution paid. My heart pounded at the evidence of his effort. This was more than words. "That's significant," I said, handing the papers back. "He's followed through." Emily exhaled a shuddering breath. "Dad, I know it's complicated. I know how much he hurt us, but maybe this is his first real step." I contemplated the lake, its surface now glistening in morning light. Boundaries had protected me. Prosecutors had delivered justice, and the cabin had become sanctuary. Yet compassion lingered in my chest, a fragile ember. After everything, could I offer Nathan something like a handshake of peace? "Let's talk," I said. "Not here. Let's meet him at the diner." She nodded, relief washing over her face. "Okay." 2 hours later, we arrived at Annie's Diner, the place that had witnessed our sorrows and our triumphs. We slipped into the back booth, its vinyl seat cold beneath us. Emily's hands fidgeted with the edge of the tablecloth. I placed the letter and receipts between us. Detective Morrison walked in, nodding as he spotted us. He ushered Nathan through the door, a quiet figure in a worn jacket, his eyes haunted but determined. The diner's bell jingled overhead as he approached. "Detective," I said, standing. Morrison gave a curt nod. Nathan hesitated, gaze flicking between Emily and me. Then he squared his shoulders. "Mr. Carlson," he began, voice low. "Emily, thank you for seeing me." I gestured to the booth. "Please sit." He settled across from us, clearing his throat. "I want to apologize in person. I know letters and receipts aren't enough, but I've kept every appointment, paid restitution in full, and I'm working on repairing the harm I caused." He exhaled. "You deserved better, your home, your dignity. I'm sorry I took that for granted." Emily's eyes glistened. "Thank you," she whispered. I'm proud of you for doing the work." I studied Nathan's face, the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. This was a man stripped to his bare self, owning his mistakes. "Counselor's notes say you've made progress," I said, "but trust isn't rebuilt overnight." Nathan nodded, swallowing. "I understand. I'm not asking for forgiveness today. I just want you to know I'm committed to change and that I regret everything I put you through." Silence followed, thick but not uncomfortable. Outside the window, a waitress shuffled trays. The hum of conversation rose and fell. I sipped my coffee, gathering my thoughts. "Emily and I have spent these weeks rebuilding our lives," I said slowly. "I'm willing to consider a conversation if we set clear boundaries. No expectations of instant reconciliation." He inclined his head. "Understood." First, I continued. "I need an apology to the community, online, in person, whatever you set up. A public acknowledgement that you were wrong." Nathan exhaled, nodding. "I'll draft something for the Tribune and post on the local community page." Second, I said, "I want you to volunteer at the Veterans Complex, once a month service to others, not just restitution to me." He sat straighter. "I'd be honored." Emily reached across and placed her hand on mine. "Dad," she began, but I shook my head softly. I turned back to Nathan. "Third, no contact with Elm Street. This cabin is our sanctuary. Any communication should go through me or through your counselor." He swallowed, his throat bobbing. "I agree." I breathed deeply. "If you abide by these conditions for 6 months, we can reevaluate. Maybe we'll have lunch again." Nathan's shoulders slumped, relief and gratitude mingling. "Thank you." Detective Morrison approached, placing a gentle hand on Nathan's shoulder. "He's kept his end. I'll monitor compliance." The formalities concluded, we sat in a newfound quiet. Emily gathered the papers into a folder. "I can't believe we're here," she whispered. I squeezed her hand. "Change is hard, but sometimes it's possible." We rose and Nathan walked us to the door. He hesitated on the threshold. "Emily," he said, voice catching, "thank you for believing in me." She nodded. "I still love you, but love doesn't mean enabling." He exhaled. "I know. I'll earn my place back if there's any room left." We watched him step into the afternoon sun, Detective Morrison following. I closed the door behind us, and Emily leaned against me. We walked back to the cabin in silence, the gravel crunching beneath our steps. Inside, the cabin smelled of fresh-baked pie. Emily had left one for us to share. We sat at the kitchen table, slicing a piece for each of us. The sweetness was a balm, reminding us that life could taste good again. I gazed at Emily across the table. "Today was a milestone for you, for him, for us." She nodded, taking a bite. "I feel like a weight's lifted." I offered a small smile. "Me too." Later that evening, after the last light faded over the lake, we stood on the deck in silence, watching fireflies flicker. Emily rested her head on my shoulder. "What do you feel?" she asked softly. I inhaled the pine-scented air. "Hope," I replied. "For you, for him, for the future." She lifted her face, tears glinting. "Thank you, Dad, for trusting me and trusting him enough to start again." I brushed a lock of hair from her brow. "Family is never perfect, but it's worth fighting for." As the cabin settled into night's hush, I realized that our story, torn apart by ultimatums and betrayal, was now mending with honesty, accountability, and grace. The journey had been long, the wounds deep, but here on this dock beneath the infinite sky, I felt the solid ground of new beginnings. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed that anything was possible.